The Screaming Staircase, Chapter 15. "Lucy," Lockwood said. "Stop, you need to talk to me." No, I really don't. "Stop going so fast. I understand why you're angry, but you've got to realize I didn't know Barnes was going to ask you to do that." "No? Well, maybe you should have guessed. Thanks to your stupid article this morning, the whole world knows about my psychic link to Annie Ward. I'm suddenly considered central to the case." "Lucy, please." Lockwood grabbed my sleeve, forced me to stop in the middle of the street. We were in Mayfair somewhere, about halfway home. The mansions were quiet, mostly hidden behind high hills or high walls and swirling mist. It had just turned midnight. Not even the ghosts were around. "Don't touch me," I said. I shook myself clear. "Because of your article, I came face to face with a murderer tonight. And, funnily enough, I didn't enjoy the experience. You didn't see his eyes, Lockwood, but I saw them. And it felt like he saw me." "He can't have." George's face was turned away from us. With his hand on his rapier hilt, he watched the fog. We'd only seen one visitor during our walk. In Green Park, a figure drifting far off along a tree-lined avenue. But it always paid to be careful. You could never tell what was around the next corner in London. "He can't have seen you," George repeated. "You were behind the glass. Obviously, he knew someone was there, and he just wanted to freak them out. That's all there is to it." "You're wrong," I said quietly. "Blake knew it was me. He'd have seen that article like everybody else. He knows all about Lockwood and Company and how Lucy Carlisle has gained vital evidence against him. He can easily find where we live, too. If he walks free, there's nothing to stop him from coming after us." Lockwood shook his head. "Lucy, Blake is not going to come after us." "Or if he does," George said, "it'll be very, very slowly, hobbling on a stick. He's over 70 years old." "What I mean is, he's not walking free at all," Lockwood went on. "He's going to be charged, found guilty, and go to prison, which serves him right. Meanwhile, what that he's got strange eyes? George's are pretty odd, too, and we don't hold it against him." "Thanks for that," George said. "I thought they were my best feature." "They are. That's the tragedy of it. Listen, Lucy, I can see why you're mad. I'm furious, too. Barnes had no right to put you through that against your will. It's typical DPRAC behavior. They think they rule the show. But they don't. Or at least they don't rule us." Lockwood raised his arms and gestured at the swirling fog, the silent road. "Look around you now. It's past midnight. We're alone in an empty city. Everyone else is asleep, with their doors locked and their charms hanging at the windows. Everyone's afraid, except for you, me, and George. We go wherever we choose, and we're not beholden to Barnes or DPRAC or anybody. We're completely free." I drew my coat around me. What he said made sense, as usual. It was good to be out in the night again, with my sword and my colleagues at my side. The distress of my brief encounter at Scotland Yard was slowly fading. I felt a little better. "I suppose you're right," I said. "You really think Blake's staying in custody?" "Of course he is." "By the way, Lucy," George said, "here's something that might cheer you up. We saw Quill Kipps while we were waiting for you. He's part of a Fitz group working for DPRAC tonight. He has to do it regularly. It's part of the deal between the organizations. Well, let's just say he's been patrolling the sewers this evening. His teams clearly had a close encounter with something nasty down there. And I don't mean a visitor." "Yuck. You should have seen them. Soaked." I couldn't help but laugh. At least Kipps still has a job. Our casebook's empty now. "Better to be poor than sticky," George said. Lockwood squeezed my arm. Come on, he said. Don't worry about tomorrow. Something will turn up. Let's get home. I fancy a peanut butter sandwich. I nodded. Cocoa and chips for me. The mist grew thicker as we went. It coiled about the iron railings and wound around the ghost lamps, muffling and twisting their intermittent beams. Our boots rang on the empty sidewalks, echoing strangely on the other side of the road, so that it sometimes seemed as if another trio walked invisibly alongside us. In Portland Row, there had been a malfunction with the ghost lamp. Blue sparks flickered at the base of the headpiece, and instead of their usual fierce brightness, the lens glowed a frail, resentful red. Most of our neighbors' windows were dark, and all were shut and curtained. The mist clung close about us as we drew level with our door. Lockwood was in the lead. He reached out his hand to open the gate and suddenly stopped dead. George and I both bumped into him. George, Lockwood said quietly, you had Annie Ward's necklace last. What did you do with it? I put it on the shelves with all the other trophies. Why? Its silver glass case was sealed? It wasn't loose or anything? Of course not. What? I just saw a light in our office window. He pointed down over the railing. The basement yard was a pool of blackness, diagonally sliced by the faint orange glow from the street lamp outside number 37. Half in and half out of that glow sat the window in question. By day, it gave a glimpse of my work chair and the vase of flowers on the center of my desk. Right now, it was entirely flat, as if a black rectangle had been painted on the brickwork. I don't see anything, George breathed. It was just for a second, Lockwood said. I thought it might be a trace of other light, but maybe... No, there it is again. This time, we'd all seen the shimmer, faint and fleeting, glinting off the interior of the glass. Shock held us in its grip. None of us moved. That was a flashlight, George said softly. I nodded. My skin crawled. Someone's in our house. Someone, Lockwood said, who's not afraid of being out at night, which means that they're armed. They'll have rapiers or flares at the very least. All right, let's think. How did they get in? I squinted up the path. Front door looks okay. You want me to check out the back? George said. They may have busted in through the garden door. But if they haven't, you'll be stuck outside. No. We need to work together on this. We'll go in the front as usual, only quietly. Come on. Lockwood flitted up the path, moving soundlessly on the tiles. At the porch he halted, pointing in silence to a little patch of splintered wood halfway up the door jamb. When he pushed the door, it swung slowly open. They jimmied the lock, George hissed. If this was their way in, Lockwood said, we can trap them down below. He beckoned us close, whispered in our ears. Okay, we check the ground floor, then we go down the spiral stairs. I don't want to hear a sound. What about the upper floors? Can't risk it. The landing squeaks. Besides, it's clearly the office that they're raiding. So, rapiers ready? We'll find them, corner them, ask them to disarm. And if they don't? I said. Lockwood's teeth glinted briefly. We use what force we need. The hallway was black. No sound came from deeper in the building. We halted a moment, with the door pulled closed behind us, letting our eyes adjust. The crystal skull lantern grinned from its side table. Our coat rack was a dark mass on the wall. Lockwood pointed with his rapier in the display shelves opposite. At first sight, they were the same as ever. Then I saw that one of the masks and gourds were slightly out of position, as if someone had sorted through them with a hasty hand. Far ahead of us, I made out the dull white glow of the thinking cloth behind the kitchen door. I listened again, heard nothing. I realized I was automatically using all my senses, both outer and inner, as if we were away on business doing the agent thing. But this was our house, our home, and we had an intruder here. Lockwood motioned with the blade to left and right. George flitted into the living room. I stepped like a shadow into the library. I could sense right away it was empty. There was no trace of a lingering presence, but it hadn't escaped our guests' attention. Below the shelves, books and papers lay strewn upon the floor. Back in the hall, Lockwood waited by the stairs. George's report was similar to mine. "Someone's working the place over," he breathed, "hunting for something." Lockwood only nodded. We stole forward to the kitchen. Whether or not our enemy had rifled through our possessions here was hard to say. Since the room was its usual mess, the table was strewn with the remnants of the meal we had eaten before going on our garden job, and the work surfaces were clogged with clutter. I noticed the pots of iron fillings nestled by the cereal and a little pile of salt bombs stacked where George had been preparing them. None of that was useful to us now. We went in search of human prey. Lockwood advanced to the little basement door. It was very slightly open. With the tip of his blade, he caught the handle, pulled it softly outward. Darkness, silence, the top of the spiral stairs. Warm air rose from below, heavy with its smells of paper, ink, and magnesium. The lights were out, and we didn't try to switch them on. From somewhere came a little scuffling noise, like rats nosing through tight spaces in the dark. We looked at one another, clenched our swords' hilts tight. Lockwood set foot upon the topmost step. He descended, moving swiftly. George and I followed, boots barely making contact with the iron. In moments, we were at the bottom. The exposed brick room we stood in was an empty portion of the cellar, occupied only by the filing cabinets and sacks of iron. Without the lights, it was entirely black, except for a faintly greenish glow shining from the archway on the right. From the opposite arch came the rat-like scuffling. A teasing hint of flashlight darted momentarily and was gone. Drifting softly, as visitors ourselves, we double-checked the right-hand arch and found a scene of chaos. Files upended, cupboards opened, a sea of papers on the office floor. On George's desk, the ghost jar had been uncovered. The skull was silhouetted in its luminous green plasm. Above it, the disembodied face spun dismally around and around. The rapier room was empty, our storeroom door still locked. All that remained was the rear of the basement, where the trophy shelves were. We flitted closer. Ahead of us, it seemed that someone grew impatient in their search. The wrestling noises sounded rather louder than before. We reached the final arch and looked in. The trophy room was not entirely dark. It rarely is by night, thanks to the glow of the cases on the shelves beside the door. Some of Lockwood's prizes, the bones and blood-stained playing cards, for instance, are entirely harmless. You could give them to a toddler to play with because they have no supernatural power. But others are active sources still, with spectral force that manifests during the hours of darkness. Soft lights glint beneath the glass, pale blues and yellows, lilacs, green, maroons, shifting, ever-changing, always looking for escape. It's a beautiful sight, but also eerie, and best not studied for too long. Someone was studying them now. A shape stood beside the shelves, a hulking figure dressed in black. It was a man, broad in the shoulder and half a head taller than Lockwood. He wore a coat with the hood drawn up to hide the face. A rapier hung at his belt. He was turned away from us, examining one of the smaller cases in the black-gloved hand. He had his flashlight trained on it closely. Spears of light reflected off its faucets and extended over the ceiling. Whatever he sought, he didn't find. He tossed the case contemplatively on the floor. "Can I offer you some tea while you ransack our place?" Lockwood said politely. The figure wheeled around. Lockwood shone his flashlight full into the intruder's face. Despite myself, I let out a gasp. The hood hung forward, curving like a raptor's beak. Beneath this cowl, the face was covered by a white cloth mask. The eye sockets were black slashed holes. Another slash, jagged and off-center, formed the mouth. Nothing of the man beneath it could be seen. The intruder was clearly blinded by the flashlight. He raised an arm against the beam. "That's right. Put up your hands," Lockwood said. The arm shot down. It reached for the rapier. "It's 3 against 1, Lockwood pointed out. A swish of metal. The sword was drawn. "Be like that, then." Lockwood raised his blade, stepped slowly forward. Plan C seemed the obvious maneuver in the circumstances. We normally use it on powerful Type 2s, of course, but it works for mortal enemies as well. I went to the left, George went to the right. Lockwood held the center. Our blades were up and ready. We moved steadily inward, hemming the intruder in. Or so we thought. The white masked figure seemed unconcerned. He raised his left hand to the shelves and grasped a case that glowed with a dim blue light. Turning, he threw it with appalling force so that it struck the floor at George's feet. Hinges cracked, and the case broke open. A fragment of finger bone fell out. At once the light escaped, bled outward like a little cloud. A faint blue apparition rose from the floorboards. It took the shape of a hopping, deformed creature dressed in rags. It rolled its head, threw back its arms, and with a sinuous, sidelong plunge sprang straight at George. I saw no more, for the intruder had seized 2 other cases and thrown them at Lockwood and me. Lockwood's bounced, but didn't open. Mine shattered completely, emitting a woman's hair fastener, 6 streams of yellow plasm, and a violent psychic wail. The streams rolled and tumbled on the floor, then rose like striking cobras and swung in my direction. With frantic hacks and swipes, I sliced them into ribbons. Some instantly dissipated and were gone. Others fused and returned to the attack. A clash of blades. Lockwood had leaped past and closed in on the enemy. Their rapiers met and met again. Beyond, George parried the specter's flailing blows. He drove it back, wove iron patterns in the air. The visitor I faced was weak and tentative. It was time to snuff it out. I scrabbled in my belt, located a bag of fillings. Ripping it clear, I tossed it down, a burst of sparkling light. The thrashing plasm shrank and dwindled, became a smoking puddle on the floor. Beside me, iron smote on iron. Lockwood and the intruder moved back and forth in the center of the room, exchanging rapid strikes. The man in the mask was fast, his attacks accurate and heavy, but Lockwood remained at ease. He moved in a swaying dance step, a sashaying, drifty sort of motion. His boots hardly touched the ground. His rapier arm gave delicate twitches, the blade tip changing position like some nimble dragonfly. George grew impatient with the contest, dropping back a little. He took a salt bomb from his belt and blew his shambling specter into twinkling motes of sapphire light. The noise distracted Lockwood, who glanced aside. At once the masked enemy swung his rapier at Lockwood's face. It would have been an awful injury if it had struck. Lockwood leaned away. The edge swished past his cheek. With his enemy unbalanced, Lockwood stepped to the side, jabbed his sword forward. The figure gave a cry, clutched at his midriff. With desperate strikes, he drove Lockwood back, and plunging past him, ran across the room. George reached out to stop him. A gloved fist swung, caught George across the cheek, sent him crashing with a moan against the wall. The intruder raced across the room toward the spiral stairs. With Lockwood in pursuit, I jumped over the fading ribbons of yellow plasm and closed in, swiping blindly with my rapier. The man fled past the stairs and through the arch into the front office. For a moment, his silhouette was illuminated by the faint light seeping through its window, and I understood what he was going to do. "Lockwood!" I cried. "Quick, Hill!" Lockwood already knew the danger. As he ran, he reached to his belt, plucked out a canister of fire. The intruder put on a spurt, drew near my desk. He leaped upon it. As he did so, threw his arms across his face. He collided with the window in a crouched position, smashing through the pane in a whirl of spinning shards. Lockwood cursed. From the far end of the office, he hurled the flare. It passed straight through the broken window, out into the yard. We heard the canister crack upon the stones. A silver-white explosion lit up the night, sending the remaining fragments of window glass hurtling back into the room. They spilled across the desk, clattering against the ghost jar so the head inside it winced and goggled. Shards like spilled ice fanned out across the floor. Lockwood sprang onto the table, sword in hand. I came to a halt behind him. We went no further. We knew we were too late. Out in the yard, white fires flickered in the broken flower pots and danced and dwindled like Christmas lights across the hanging ivy. Smoke rose toward the street, somewhere up above us. A variety of car alarms beeped and yammered. But it had all been for nothing. The intruder was gone. At the top of the steps, the front gate swung gently. It came slowly to a halt. Lockwood jumped back to the floor. Behind us, a shape emerged. George, shuffling painfully, clutching the side of his jaw. He was bleeding from a cut to his lower lip. I gave him a wan smile of sympathy. Lockwood patted his arm. "That was exciting," George said thickly. "We should have guests over more often." All at once, I felt lightheaded. My legs gave way. I supported myself upon the desk. For the first time since the fight began, I remembered the aches and strains left over the Sheen Road fall. Lockwood must have experienced a similar come-down. It took him 2 or 3 tries to fix his rapier back into his belt. "George," he said, "the Annabelle Ward necklace, you said you put it with the trophies? Mind going to see if it's still there?" George dabbed at his lip with his shirt sleeve. "Don't need to. I already thought of that. Just had a look. It's gone." "You're sure you put it on the shelves?" "This very morning. It's definitely not there." There was silence. "You think that's what he came for?" I asked. Lockwood sighed. "It's possible. Anyway, he's clearly got it now." "No," I said. "He hasn't." At which I pulled my collar aside to reveal the silver glass case with the pendant in it, hanging safely on its cord around my neck.